Muchas gracias, Mónica. ¿Me escuchas bien? Buenos días a
Perfecto.
todas y todos. Soy muy feliz and really looking forward to today's morning with you all. We are going to have three different cases. So we're going to talking about A/B tests and statistical matching and many different things, interesting concepts, and let's try to make it a fun morning for everyone. So I'm going to start right away sharing my screen because we have a lot of ground to cover today. So happy to see your positive and upbeat reaction. It tells me how excited you are to learn today and spend time together. Hopefully we'll play some music as well. And I hope everybody's having a good week. These weeks have been very busy for me, just trying to finish the semester with all my students. They did very well. And next weekend, I actually have a graduation ceremony. So it's always good to see the students finishing their studies. So today we are going to learn about the field of how to use comparison, and more specifically statistical comparisons, in order to get an edge on the market, in order to attract more customers, for instance. And many times you are familiar when you purchase things on the internet that you get bundles and offers, discounts, and things that make it more attractive to you to consider a product that otherwise maybe you will not really be interested in. And the reason for those discounts most of the time is not because the company is trying to be generous with you. It's trying to be attractive for you to give your money and become a customer or develop loyalty or consider a company that you never considered before for a product that you regularly purchase. Okay, so this is a real world scenario, and the business context is that you work for a company that is trying to compete with bigger players in the market. And so you know that for small companies, it's always more challenging to affirm themselves in a competitive market. And they are trying to increase their market share. And they have decided to give an extra 5% discount for those that book both a flight and a hotel from their website. You get this all the time when you go to book your hotel flights, your flights, and then you say, okay, do you want to add a hotel? And many times there are no discounts at all. They're just like trying to make it easy for you to say, okay, now you book your flight, probably you're going to stay there and you might need a place to stay. Here it is. Maybe there is no saving for you there, but they are just making it convenient. But in this case, there is actually the possibility to actually benefit from a small discount. Okay, and the question is this promotion effective in increasing the number of customers that go to the website that is actually called TravelSmart? And how do you find out about that? Well, you cannot just say, okay, well, I do it, I just see how many customers I have now compared to yesterday, because the number of customers can fluctuate for many different reasons. The question that you want to ask is, if everything was equal, in economics, there is this expression that is called ceteris paribus, which is a Latin expression that means all things being equal. Does this single promotion bring an edge, bring something that is significantly different? And this is the question that we want to understand. And this is what is called an A/B test. An A/B test means that you are comparing a version A and a version B of something. It can be two different populations, can be two different groups that have one single difference. And how are you able to measure this difference? Well, there is a concept that is called randomization. because obviously it's not an experiment that you can do in a lab. That you are controlling everything exactly, because you are dealing with people. You are dealing with a world that is never the same from day after day. When you're in a lab, let's say you are comparing two chemical treatments on a cell, you can replicate the exact same situation. You can control for everything, temperature, light, and everything. And perhaps you put a different treatment in one platelet compared to the other, and you see the difference. However, in real world, you do not have a real treatment versus control study. And this is why you need randomization in order to be able to disentangle the effect of your promotion in this case. So variation A, you have a 5% discount if you book both flight and hotel, and variation B is no extra discount. Okay. So the case is structured as follows. First, you define a state of with a precise hypothesis. Then you perform the test. We are going to see how, and then analyze the test results and finally make a decision. Is it worth it to have this 5% discount, or perhaps is even leading to loss of revenue? It can happen. Sometimes you have a promotion that just doesn't work, is not attractive enough. And some people might have booked that option regardless of the discount. Well, in that case, you're losing 5% of your revenue. Not so good, right? So we want to understand if the effect is positive or not. David is asking, are we considering the colors of both options? Well, that's a good question. Psychology can play a role sometimes about the color that is used to attract the customer, and it could be interesting to see if that might play a role, because you might say, well, the blue button was not visible enough. It's also possible, though, that in this case you can see that the logo, the 5% discount, is more visible than no extra discount. So let's leave this to marketing experts to determine what is more visually appealing. So step one, we have to determine a precise, simple, testable hypothesis. And in order to make a test, we have to have something precise that we can actually tell unequivocally that it's going to conduct what we need. So here the case gives you an example that I found rather curious about the spaghetti test. As an Italian, I never heard about this test, but apparently there are some chefs that throw the spaghetti. Why would you do that? To the wall to verify if they are cooked or not. And if they stick to the wall, apparently they are cooked. And if not, they are not cooked. Well, that's rather surprising. I would rather taste it first. But in this case, it's hard to tell. What if it's overcooked and still sticks? It's not really. Oh, wow, that's interesting. Some of you actually did this. I need to try it at least once, just for the experience. Exactly, Camillo. The pasta should be al dente, of course. But yeah, by the way, I'm going to visit Colombia in a few weeks, so I'm gonna try to make sure that I ask people if they try this. This test seems to be very culturally specific. All right. Oh, Brian, we actually need a specific type of wall too. So as you can see, there are so many different versions of this and how many different things can go wrong, that this is obviously not a very good hypothesis to start verifying a test. So what are we testing with our experiment? This is exercise one, and it's more than an exercise. It's just to start a conversation. What are we trying? Remember that the business contest was to increase the number of customers for the company. So which ones of these hypotheses are we testing? Hypothesis A The 5% discount for users booking both flights and hotels will ultimately increase revenue. Option B, the 5% discount will bring in more online subscriptions to our site. Option C, the 5% discount will incentivize users who book flights to also book hotels. Or option D, the 5% discount allows for TravelSmart to increase base prices of hotels without affecting sales numbers, so the net revenue balances out, but users are more satisfied by purchasing with a discount. So which ones of this are we really testing? What do you say? All right, so we have some votes for C and A, B as well. Okay, C. I'm going to do like a fast statistics just by looking at the answers that appear on Slack, and I will tell you which one is I feel that is the most popular. So far, C is winning, with A is a close second. Oh, and there is polls and answers. Let me check that. All right, yeah. Actually, A is winning. C a close second, B many fewer votes, and D so far is the one that has been less favored. All right, go back to live chat. All right, so let's summarize what can be a good hypothesis and which one inside is probably not. So let's start with A. The winner is actually incorrect, because there are too many uncontrollable variables in terms of what can lead to an increase in revenue. And the promotion by itself cannot really tell you if the variation in revenue is caused by the promotion or not. In this sense, the hypothesis is not really something that you can test just by a 5% in revenue. For instance, if you're comparing to different periods of the year, there might be a different demand for traveling to a specific location. And you might say, well, what if we compare last year to this year on the same time period? Well, last year was a rather different year. Just think in terms of the pandemic, how much travel was restricted. So there are so many variables that you need to control that by themselves, and we'll see there are methods actually to test this type of hypothesis, but a simple test that allows you to control for just compare two scenarios that differ by only one characteristic, it would be extremely hard to capture this effect. So is to A will not be as sharp as we would like. What about B? B was the 5% discount will bring in more online subscription to our site. Also, B is not a correct hypothesis, because even though you can observe an increase in subscription because of the 5% discount, what you are interested here is that you want to see more customers purchasing that package. Just because you're subscribing to a website doesn't mean that you're buying, right? So just be careful about the hypothesis. Now, option C, which was favored by many, option C was favored by many, says the 5% discount will incentivize users who book flights to also book hotels. That's true, because the incentive is actually measurable. It's 5% discount. So you have an incentive and say, hey, if you are in the market for a hotel and you have a discount, you are more encouraged to purchase it now rather than later or from a different website. So in this way, you are encouraging your, it's a deal exactly for that, okay? This is a net advantage for a customer that wants to take advantage of the discount and not pay full price, let's say from another website, which are the competitors. Remember, we want to increase the number of our customers against our larger competitors. Why is D incorrect? I think that most of you have realized that D is incorrect because, first of all, it's a very convoluted statement. You notice that we require the hypothesis to be simple, to be testable, to be more, something that we can test directly. And in part, here there are too many variables that are playing a role, and it will not be possible to determine that any variation that we observe to be due to the 5%. So option C is the best one among the ones that are proposed here. All right, so as you can see, one of the major issues of A/B tests are taking into account confounding variables. That is, if I'm comparing scenario A and scenario B, and I see a difference, how do I know that the difference is due only to the promotion that I am applying and is not due to other things that are happening? Well, for that, we need to factor in the variables that help us saying, okay, well, let's try to control for the other factors, and then let's see if the net effect is solely due to the promotion. So how many control variables should we have? Well, as many as possible and as many as reasonable. So now we enter the part of the case where we discuss control variables. So first of all, control variables are quantifiable elements that remain unchanged throughout an experiment. And this is important to identify them so we can eliminate the confounding factor, the noise that might be making our signal, our difference, contaminated with dirt. Let's say, you think you're measuring the impact of the promotion, but really you are measuring the impact of something else, okay? Here gives you like a nice, cute example. Taylor, the person that is the protagonist here, regularly takes a walk with his dog every morning. And then he decides that he needs to lose some weight and to be more physically active, and eats more fruits and vegetables, and he goes on a diet. And then Taylor wants to see if this diet is effective to help him in his fitness journey. But over the next few weeks, Taylor is eating less, so he's less energized, and decides to say, okay, well, today I'm not going to go for a walk. I just relax a little more. And Taylor ends up gaining a few pounds. Now, can you see here that there is like a contrasting effect, right? It's the extra pounds that he gained, it's not because of the diet, because the lack of exercise might be playing a role. So there is a confounding variable that it's playing a role in assessing the efficacy of the diet, and is the fact that the diet led to a change in lifestyle, that is less walks, that made it harder for Taylor to lose weight. However, if Taylor identified the daily exercise as a control variable, the experiment would have been more precise, because perhaps, I don't know, a model that would look at that would say, well, you gained 3 pounds because you are not exercising, but you lost 1 because of your diet, so you only gained 2. So that effect was the combination of a positive and a negative effect. Does it make sense so far? Why do we need to take into account control variables? Because we want to be sure that we know what we are measuring. Exercise 2. So let's talk about control variables. Which of the following variables do you think are significant enough to control for? Select all that apply. A, changes to the user experience and visuals on the website that were already previously scheduled to deploy. B, existence of a brand new unique route that no other competitor offers. C, performance of your sales team. D, updates to the current engineering infrastructure of the website. Ricardo, yes. In epidemiology, we have to be very wise selecting the control groups because we want to have a group that is very similar to the treatment group in order to be comparable. We need to compare apples and apples and oranges with oranges. Manzanas y manzanas, naranjas and naranjas. Right. So let's see if we can have a quick poll for exercise 2. Okay, so here we have A is winning by a margin. Remember that you can select more than one here, okay? So I hope the poll allows you to click on more than one of them if you think that they should be clicked. But we have a clear hierarchy. It's interesting that A has not twice the votes of C, and C has twice the votes of B. And D, well, D has a little more than B. All right. So why or why not any of these variables should be or should not be included? A is not really important. Why is that? Notice that here it says that the visuals on the websites were already previously scheduled to be deployed. And they were going to be rolled out anyway. Therefore, by default, they would already be incorporated into our test. So remember, we haven't run the test yet, okay? So this change was already supposed to happen and is now going to happen en route. I think that what threw you off, which I completely get it, why this could have been confusing, is because you probably assumed, okay, I'm gonna measure first option A, and then I'm gonna be measured option B, and there are changes in the user experience. Not the case. We are measuring option A and B at the same time. So that's why A is not really important. B, Carolina, let's don't choose A. Who knows? B is correct. Now, this is a variable that we can control, because if the route is significant enough that can really change the number of purchasing users, then it could confound our results. Just because if there is a new route that only our customers can book, well, of course you're going to see an increase in number of customers, just because if anybody will try to go to that destination. So is definitely something that we need to take into account. Let's assume that our manager deems that this route won't be taken frequently enough so that we can move forward with testing with this marketing plan. So C is actually a variable that we should consider because even though the sales team performance can affect the number of users, we should try not to force the sales team to maintain a steady level of contribution, because it would negatively affect the company. We cannot tell people, well, always try to to perform at the same level. We should always say, hey, you always try to do your best, because, you know, just for the sake of performing an experiment, you don't need to like sacrifice other core goals of your company. Okay. So we should be careful though on how we measure the performance of the sales team and how we incorporate it. So it might be not super simple to incorporate in our analysis. Now, part D, it's not really that important, because even though there might be an effect for the company as a whole, it will not be probably enough to capture an effect in the number of users, especially if the promotion is run at the same time. Jaime is saying, we are talking about purchase via a website. Our sales team is important here. Well, actually, many times they have these online support systems when you have users that are experiencing glitches, or they get errors, or they are not just computer experts. And a good sale representative is important. Also, somebody makes a mistake with booking and they need to reschedule. There can be a bunch of things where the sales team can happen. David is asking what happened to the weight of Taylor's dog. Well, it depends, because probably if Taylor is so tired that he cannot get up, probably is not even feeding the dog. So the dog is eating less, but the dog is also walking less. I hope he's well. I hope the dog is doing well. So control variables are very hard to get a complete list of. And there is, okay, one of the problems of A/B tests or any type of quasi-experimental design test is the problem of omitted variables. That is, the variables that we cannot include. Why we cannot include all the variables, you might say? Well, because some of the variables are not measured. Some of the variables you might not be even thinking about it. So what do we do? Is there hope? Well, the good thing, yes, there is hope, and statistics can help you to address this. And we see the role of randomization and sample size. If you have a large sample, perhaps a lot of these variables could average out, and then you can basically go around to that problem. There is also the as you will keep studying, you will learn about instrumental variables and proxy variables that are supposed to capture an effect that you cannot directly measure. For instance, if you are comparing house prices and you don't know, let's say, the exact square footage, but you know the number of bedrooms, well, that can be like a reasonable proxy for, you know, to addressing the price. Nicholas, I don't understand if the experiment is applied to all people on the website or only those who buy the flights separately. No, what they want to do is simply introduce this discount and see if the number of people that actually purchase the flight together with the hotel increases compared to before, basically, if the number of customers has increased. William, how can we know that we have selected the correct hypothesis or variables? Is there any clue after performing the analysis that hint us to reevaluate those? Well, that's an excellent question. First of all, you need a statistician, or, you know, in the sense that one of the guidelines is exactly to have a hypothesis that is simple and that is measurable. And typically, we have a good hypothesis to test before we do the analysis. It's not the other way around. We should not necessarily change our hypothesis based on the result. Sometimes we might observe that there is not a significant difference, but that's not because the test was bad. It's simply because maybe the promotion was not effective. And how to select the variables? Well, domain knowledge is often important. If I ask you, what are the determinants of the price of the house? Just to stay with the same example, well, you probably will tell me a bunch of things. If you ever try to buy a house, you would tell me, well, how big is the house? How new is the house? What neighborhood? Is it close to interesting places or close to a school and so on? So, all those variables. And what are the prices of the houses nearby? So all of those variables are variables that you need to take into account, right? Herman is saying, usually when using A/B test, the site will render a random version of the site to every visitor, but we should have in mind that the customer segment, yeah, of course. I mean, it really depends. The way that you want to perform this test, it really depends on the, the scope of your company, and you can make it location specific and so on. And of course, if you're competing in a global market, a promotion might be effective for a specific route, but not others. And but here we are assuming that if we are targeting one precise route, okay, or one precise destination, because we are talking about flight and hotel, chances are is that the users that will get it will be flying from place A to place B. So there is an automatic selection in that case. So one of the things that can help us being successful in running an A/B test is defining KPIs. What is a KPI? KPI is called key performance indicators. So once we have identified the hypothesis, the control variables, and we are ready to deploy our experiment, we need to define what are the variables that we need to measure to quantify the outcome and the effectiveness of our intervention. In this case, the intervention would be the promotion, right? So these variables are called key performance indicators. And there are many metrics that we can consider depending, of course, not just on the case that you have at hand, but also within the same case, you might make different choices. For instance, you might look at the number of absolute customers, increase in customers, or you could look at the a percentage increase compared to last year, or a percentage increase compared to the market share, or the number of people that are flying on that specific day. So you have to think about what you actually want to measure based on what your initial goal was, okay? There are two main types of KPIs, macro conversions and micro conversions. So what are they? Macro conversions are the ideal metrics that are directly tied with our business objective. So remember, here we're trying to increase the number of customers through the website. So in this case, would be a macro conversion. So a conversion that is actually matching exactly what the initial goal was. A micro conversion, on the other hand, are conversions that are more indicative, but they do not necessarily guarantee a progress towards the initial goal of the macro conversion. So let's see some examples. So a macro conversion can be the total number of ticket sales, the membership purchases, the sales and leads conversions. Micro conversions, on the other hand, are views on a specific route. So are people actually clicking when they see the promotion and they go to the page just to check what options are there in terms of hotels, in terms of routes, time of the day, number of layovers, and so on. But also time spent on a landing page. Once people click, do they just close that window, or they actually spend time reading? Notice that this is something that might signal an increasing number of customers, and it might help. So that is, if people spend more time, they are more likely perhaps to join the, to purchase that package. Similar to what happens at the grocery store. One of the things that happens at the grocery store is that they put, at least here in the US, they put slow music. And they put slow music because when you're listening to slow music, you tend to move slower. Why is that? Well, has to do with our psychology. If you have upbeat type of music, you tend to move faster. So that's an example of microconversion. What is the hope? That by spending more time at the grocery store, at the supermarket, you'll be more likely to put things in your cart and buy stuff. So if instead you say, okay, I'm going to go to the supermarket because I need to buy some oranges. If you go there and just purchase the orange, you're going to be out right away just with that item. However, if you say, okay, I need to buy oranges and I'm going to just walk around a little bit, then you might start seeing attractive products and say, oh, let me get that chocolate and that pasta. Oh, look at this new, oh, look, there is a discount on rice. Let me get the rice as well. And so, that's exactly why the time spent on landing page, although it does not necessarily mean more customers, it might be one of the indicators that leads to more customers. Claudia, Dollar City is hell for my wallet. I've never been to Dollar City. I should go at some point. Yeah. And I try to be careful as well. I don't want my wallet to be broken. Yes, it says always wear your headphones. Well, just make sure that you have music that is actually not playing too slow or something, because then you might actually end up buying more. All right. So let's perform the following experiment to better understand macro and micro conversions. And suppose that we run the experiment, the 5% discount, and let's look at the results after 60 days, okay? And let's look at the following plot. So we have 60 days where we start observing, and then after 60 days, we see what things are changing after we introduce the promotion, right? So in blue, we have the visits to flight page. We can see that on day 60, there is an increase in number of visits to the page. So that's, we said that the visits to the flights page is an indication, is a micro conversion, right? Then we have in orange, we have the visits to the JFK to YZ page. We see that there is an increase. In green, we see the number of flights that were added to cart. Notice that, yes, there seemed to be an increase, but it's very slow. It doesn't happen abruptly like for the two micro conversions. Then we have number of accounts created. Well, the number of accounts created doesn't really seem to have changed that much. In purple, we have the number of tickets purchased. Not much of a difference, quite honestly. And then we have the number of hotels booked. There's probably not that much change. Maybe we would have basically to perform some statistical analysis. So the following table summarizes the plot that we are seeing here. So we have, this is a fake scenario. And we have the pre-experiment mean and the post-experiment mean, and then the percentage in change, okay? So if we look at the visits to the page, we see that before the introduction of the promotion, we had about the average was about 14,000, right? And post-experiment, it was about 17,000, which seems to be a substantial increase of 20%. So the visits to the page was 24% increase. The number of flights added to carts were 15% increase, great. But notice that the accounts created and the tickets purchased, they are not following the same trend. The number of accounts created seems to be very stable. And the number of tickets purchased, it actually decreased. So was this a total failure? Well, we have to think about it. The number of hotels booked was 1.95% increase, which could be actually a metric of success. We are talking about in percentage terms, so it could actually be interesting. And of course, you know, the first 60 days are not the same as the next 60 days. We're talking about quite long periods of time here because, so, you know, the season might change. It might make the difference between having like 2 summer months compared to 2 fall months, expecting that in the summer people travel more. So there are different things that we need to consider here. And this is why, you know, the case is not trivial, it's actually, it's insightful and is supposed to provide insight. So the number of tickets purchased and hotels booked did not change significantly. That means that the experiment was not properly designed in this way, you know, 60 days and then 60 days, because it seems that we might even have lost some money just because we are selling cheaper tickets and we are selling less of them. So that is one of the problems that I was. So one of the major takeaways is that when we define an experiment, we want to identify and track macro conversions as our key performance indication, because the micro conversions may or may not be good proxies for your macro conversions. So the micro conversions can be still measured as secondary goals or as indicators that can provide helpful feedback and input about how to fine-tune some of the strategies. However, we have to be careful that might not be what we are testing for. So for our experiment, the most sensible macro conversion that we can use is the number of distinct users who purchased a ticket or booked a hotel, because this is directly correlated to the number of users of the website. So not looking at the number of tickets, but the number of single users. Remember, the goal is not necessarily to increase sales with the promotion. The goal is to increase the number of customers, okay? So your tickets could go up, keeping the same customers as well, right? Just because the same customers might be traveling more. But the initial goal was not that. The initial goal was to increase your customer base. So, Marlon, the A/B test results can be understood as a causal effect. Well, we are going to talk later today about causal effect. In order to measure a causal effect, we will have to satisfy several requirements. We have to be especially strict in defining correctly a treatment group and a control group, which in a quasi-experimental design would be called intervention group and counterfactual group. And also, we need to be very careful in matching these groups and take into account the correct variables that we want to control for. So let's suppose that we have a good hypothesis, that we have a good number of variables that we want to control for, and that we have a correct key performance indicator, perhaps a macro conversion. Okay, so suppose that we did our homework correctly and we have these elements taken care of. Now we are ready to deploy our experiment. When we talk about treatment and control groups, we have to divide our users into group A and group B. That way, we can apply the experiment on group B and see how it compares to the group of customers that are not getting that opportunity. How we define group A and group B? Well, in this particular example here, group A was before the intervention and group B was after the intervention, let's say. But there are different ways to do this. You can actually run the promotion at the same time and just select at random some customers that you want to offer the promotion. Or there are other ways too. So we are going to discuss it. So we refer to group B as the treatment group. This comes from the language of clinical trials. When you are studying the efficacy of a new medicine, of a new treatment, you have a group that is given the treatment, and then you have the control group. The control group is still given something. It's called the placebo, which is basically something that looks like the medicine, but is really nothing. It's water, or it's a pill that contains sugar or something that does not change. But however, psychologically, everybody is supposed to think that they are getting the medicine, because the placebo effect is actually a very measurable effect in medicine. That is, if you are convinced that you are getting treatment, even if you're not, there is a little improvement that you're going to make just because you psychologically feel better and you tend to report better symptoms, just psychological effect. Like sometimes, there are a lot of these homeopathic type of products that say, oh, it doesn't contain chemicals, it's just like, based on, and when there's no real medication, but just because you do something with it, it makes you feel better. So the treatment group will be called B in this case, and and the control group is A. Okay. So exercise 3. Again, we're going to have another poll here. So these are not really exercises; they are more like they are conceptual type of activities. Just to introduce this topic, is not an analytical case. Imagine that you have 100,000 users. How would you deploy the experiment? A, start out by exposing 2% of users to the experiment. If the experiment sees no noticeable impact, ramp up the experiment to 50% users. That's scenario number 1. Number 2, or B, start by exposing 2% users to the experiment. If the experiment sees no noticeable impact, ramp up the experiment to 7% users, and later to more and more users. C, expose 10% users to the experiment. This is a balanced size of the treatment group. It is large enough to see the results of the experiment and exposes a small enough population in case the experiment is unsuccessful. So it's just basically divide your customer space into 10% will get the treatment, and 10% will get the experiment and everybody else will not. And D, give a DL to 50%. With the intention to compare against the control group. This increases the information gain and increases efficiency. So which one would you consider? Yes, Camilo, that's true. Commercially available products made by pharmaceutical companies, typical fillers. Yeah. So let's see on polls. So C seems to be winning this time. A is not getting votes because of the philosophy that A is always wrong. And D is a close second. So should we have 10% or 50% of the users? So that's the question basically that you seem to be more interested in. All right, so well, let's talk about it. A is obviously incorrect. While starting out an experiment, it's very important to mitigate risk. First on a small population before ramping up to a large population. Especially, imagine that something has, this besides the example of the sales promotion, imagine that a new product, let's say, is not very good or it contains a flaw and so on. You do not want to try it out with such a large number. And 2% would be an appropriate choice. However, ramping up immediately to 50%, then it would be, if you do not see an impact, it would be extremely risky and it's not good. B, well, this is actually interesting because you're minimizing risk just by going little by little. And it's gradual enough that minimizes the risk, while at the same time you are be able to measure something. Okay, notice that we are not talking about a small sample here, because 2,000 users is still very large. Okay, so you should not think necessarily in terms of percentage of population. The sample size is more important than the share of the population. Now, of course, if your population is very small, if you have 10 customers, well, or if you have 100 customers, you cannot perform an experiment just with 2. 2% would be too little. But in this case, you have 100,000. So part B is correct. And part C is incorrect. Imagine that, our product is defective. If you launch a new product or a new promotion, now, if you launch a promotion of 5% on such a large percentage of users, what happens is that you're going to lose a lot of money. So you really have to be sure that the promotion is going to lead to an increase in customers. Because if it will not, then your loss would be very large. However, the goal of the experiment, remember, the goal of the experiment is not to increase the number of customers, is to measure whether or not you can increase it. So you have to be very careful here, okay? And again, D is also incorrect because you are, if you are exposing 50% users with the intention to compare to the control group, what if the promotion is not effective? If the promotion is not effective, it means that these customers would have still bought those packages and you're just giving a discount for free. So, so B is the most sensitive thing, to start with a sample that is large enough to measure things, but it's small enough to mitigate risk. Is this clear? Because this is a very, very important point. And the point is that you shouldn't be concerned about the saying, oh, 2%, that's too small. You have to consider in the specific scenario. Okay, so this time this was actually it tricked a lot of people. Lina, how do you choose the right percentage of users? Well, scenario B actually gives you the opportunity to fine tune it. If 2% is too small, if you don't see any specific increase, you might want to say, okay, well, perhaps I can bring it to 5% or to 6%, 7%. So start with something that, makes sense in terms of you're taking a risk, the risk of losing 5% of your revenues. You have to, it really depends on your company if they can take that risk and if it's justified by the advantage that you would have. So I think it depends really from different line of businesses, and also in terms of number of customers that you have. The more customers that you have, the less the percentage can be. Because if you have 10 million customers, to just see if something works, you don't need 2% of 10 millions. You just probably still need 5,000 users, 2,000 users. So again, it's more about the sample size rather than the percentage of the population. Exercise 4. Oh, Herman, you talked about the test cost as a criteria. This means that in some cases, some tests can't be done because we cannot afford the sample required. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If you were a micro company, perhaps this would not be the best way to, using a promotion might not be the best way to increase the number of customers. Yeah, you might think about other things. But yeah, the cost of sampling can be extremely high. Think, for instance, even in the pharmaceutical companies, when you have to try a new product, a new medicine, you have to pay the volunteers in order to inject something on their bodies. So yeah, it's actually something that should be considered. Alexandra, if we choose a little portion, it's not violating that the data must be balanced. Not really, because what you want to see is that you have enough data. In the end, you will be comparing percentage from sample from group A to group B. And if your sample from group A is large enough and the group B is large enough, you don't have to be worried about being balanced. You cannot. Again, it's not about the population size, it's about the sample size. John, won't the sample size increase uncertainty? Yes, but marginally. And this is the thing, in statistics, you will notice that there is little to gain from going, let's say, from a population of 1,000 to a population of 2,000. This is the way that sampling works. Unless you have a very, very small margin that you're trying to capture. Now, the smaller the effect that you're trying to measure, the more samples you need. However, since here we are talking about you're not saying, okay, will this promotion give us one more customer? Then in that case, you will need a huge sample size just to determine that. But here you want to see a sizable effect. And in order to obtain a sizable effect, you don't need. If the sizable effect is there, you don't need a huge sample. Now, if you want to say, okay, let me give you an example from ecology. Suppose that you are studying lizards and you have lizards from 2 different regions. And your hypothesis is that lizards from island B are longer than lizards from island A. If the true difference is, let's say, 2 millimeters, in order to capture that little difference, you will have to survey thousands of lizards. However, if their difference is, let's say, 3 centimeters, then in that case, you probably need a sample of 50 or 60 lizards, just statistically speaking. So remember, the standard error is given by the estimated standard deviation divided by the square root of the sample size. So if the variability is large, okay, then you really need a large sample size in order to make the error small. But if the variability is very, very small, then you really, you need a large sample size. So you don't need such a large sample size. So that's the message. David, when we know that a percentage is good enough to make a decision, when we should stop increasing? Well, when you start seeing a significant difference, it could be, and when you perhaps you say, okay, I can stop when I say, okay, if I keep increasing the percentage, I'm gonna lose revenue. So you have to consider how much money you can lose. So if running the promotion ends up being too costly and is not increasing the number of customers, probably the promotion is not effective and you should leave it at that, right? So consider the following two options for deploying our experiment. The first 2% of users get the new deal and randomly pick 2% of the users to get the new deal. Which of the following statements is true? Option 1 is best, as it's the fastest way to learn about whether users like the new deal. So you just say, okay, I say, and go. The next 2% of users get the new deal. Or randomly pick 2% of the users. Option 2 is best. So statement A says that option 1 is best. Statement B says option 2 is better than option 1 because you are more likely to get a representative group of users by using randomization. Option C, randomly picking users makes the whole experiment difficult to analyze because we do not have control over who gets the deal, and thus what one learns from this experiment is uncertain. D, option 1 and 2 are not really different unless we have more information. So which one of these statements is true? I would like to hear from you on this. So B is really, really winning strongly here. And the other options are not considered a lot. So, well, let's see. A is incorrect. Imagine that you roll the experiment at 8 a.m. Colombian time. So most of the users in the first 2% are going to be from the US and probably from the East Coast, 9 a.m. Eastern time. However, if a significant fraction of the users who are likely to book both the flight and travel from the West Coast or from Asia, then you are excluding this group. So you have a problem of representation just because it's just too early for some areas. So this experiment is kind of American, US centric because it's basically considering American market as a measure of. So, you know, it's, yeah, we have to really consider what the target market is. So B is correct. So you're getting the gist out of it. And yes, congratulations, the vast majority is selected B, because randomization avoids the issue mentioned. So if you're randomizing, let's say throughout the day, you will get customers from all over the world, right? And so it would be a sample that is less biased. C is incorrect. Even though randomization makes the outcome of a particular user getting the deal uncertain, it makes sure that the user who get the deal indeed are a good representation of the target base. So what we are saying here is that the goal of the experiment is not to reach out to all potential successful customers, but is to get a sample of those that might be successful. And that's all we need to know for the experiment. Then if the experiment is successful, then we can discuss about how we can implement this to maximize our customer base. And we will talk later in the how to deal with randomization. Now, D is incorrect because when you do not have further information, randomization can actually help you to to overcome some of the biases and issues that can go wrong. So let's talk about randomization. Question for Oscar. Can you remind me, please, the time that we are supposed to have the break? Was it 10:20? I just want to make sure that we...
Yeah, we have time.
Yeah, okay. So let's talk about randomization. So randomly giving 2% of users the deal does not mean that exactly 2% of users at any given time have received the deal. Because really depending on how many visitors there are in that moment, we'll see that there is fluctuation around the 2% goal. So here we have a little applet that you can run. The percentage of users that are getting the deal as the day goes by, it will be a little more or a little less than 2%, depending on the time of the day. So let's start the experiment with the target goal of having 2,000 users. So oh, Omar, you're having issues with the applet? Well, just try to follow for now the histogram that we are seeing. So here we are looking at the number of hours. Now, all of you will be probably getting slightly different histograms if you're able to run it. And that's just because it's a random experiment. This applet is generating what is the percentage of users that are getting the deal at any given time. And we can stop it now at 5,000. So this is the actual percentage of users that are shown the variation A, which would be the promotion. Exercise 5. Suppose you ran the experiment for a day, randomly giving the deal to 2% of the users. And again, the users number can actually change, right? Suppose also that you have a user base of over 1 million, okay? However, at the end of the day, you observe that only 1% of the users actually received the deal. Which of the following choices best explain this discrepancy? So you are giving the deal to 2% of the users. You have 1 million base users. However, only 1%. Question from Santiago. I don't understand what we are measuring with the histogram. Oh, we are measuring how many, what actual percentage of users are getting the deal by selecting at random about 2% of the users. And that depends on the hours. Notice that here we have a count, and the histogram is measuring how often that percentage is selected. So here we have 2%, here we have 2.001%, and so on. So we have some variability around 2%, but is reasonably concentrated around 2%. So on exercise 5, what could be the reason why we are observing only 1% of the users actually receiving the deal? Option A, 1 is well within the variation you would expect because of the randomization, and thus you can proceed with ramping up the experiment. Remember what the randomization looked like. 1%? 1% is definitely much lower than what you would expect, even accounting for the variation. Thus, you might suspect a bug in your software and consult your engineering team to check if all of the intended users are getting the deal or not. So this is like really a case scenario and say, okay, wait a second. I wanted to give the deal to 2% of the customers. However, only 1% are getting it. Why is that? We know that it can be a little bit more than 2, it can be a little bit less than 2, but 1%? Part C, yes, it is outside of the range of what you would expect to the sample size, but you can still proceed with ramping up the experiment because there are still a large number of users who got the deal. Okay, so A, B, or C here? So B and C, in this case, they are basically tied up in your poll results, and A is actually a distant third. Well, let's get this out of the way right away. A is definitely outside of the range of variability, because we can see that the range of variability is literally thousands of percentage points. It's a very, very tight range, around 2%. So 1% is much smaller than the number of users we should get the deal according to randomness. So there is no way that just by selecting numbers of customers, by setting customers a number that only 1% will get the deal. So A is incorrect. B is correct. 1% is much smaller than the actual number. And since the difference is so large, it's basically half, you need to check what's going on. There is no other explanation that other than either a bug or a fact that there are problems visualizing it on the website, or is not visible at all, or there is something that that is happening that is leading people to not click on it. C is incorrect. Yes, you can get some information from the 1% of the customers that got the deal. However, since we are talking about a large discrepancy, there could be so many other issues that are going wrong, and you might want to even doubt if actually that's true that 1% got it. It's one of those things that when you see such a large discrepancy, you want to look closer before you continue doing the experiment. Okay. So what happens? So we said that the best course of action was to start with 2%. Assume that 2% is more or less the number of customers that we are actually reaching with the experiment. So what happens in the last phase, which is ramping up the experiment? And suppose that you have run your experiment for 2% of the users for a couple of days. And before discussing when and how to increase this percentage, let's talk about how we can understand the results of the A/B experiment. Suppose you decide to randomly give the deal to 10% of users and have the promotion for a couple of days. If you're interested in purchasing users, you may calculate the difference in percentage of purchasing users between the two groups and say, okay, well, we started with a small group. Now we have a more sizable group, and we want to actually start comparing the percentage of purchasing users between A and B. Suppose that we have run the experiment, and this is what we observe. The 95% confidence interval is an increase between 0.2% and 1.4% with a p-value of 0.004. So we are seeing that a moderate increase that is statistically significant. Notice that the confidence interval does not contain 0. And the p-value is very, very small. So there is a very negligible chance, is 4 out of 1,000. It's not negligible, but it's very small chance that this happened just at random and that the promotion had no impact on it. So there is high evidence that the promotion was effective to lead to an increase, okay, between 0.2 and 1.4%, which, you know, it's, again, we're talking about percentage. So if you're talking about, so the mid value should be about 0.8%, right? That means if you have 1 million customers, the 0.8% would mean that you would get what? 8,000 more customers. And, you know, so yeah, it was effective in increasing the number. However, is this too small? Is too large? Well, that's up to the company to define. Anyway, the confidence interval is telling us whether or not the effect is measurable and significantly different from 0. If the interval contained a value of 0, then we would say that the promotion was not effective, right? Of course, here we are assuming that our alpha is 0.05, but this would be also still significant if our alpha was, let's say, 0.01, okay? So if the experiment is run for a longer period of time, the confidence interval would be shorter. So probably the value would be, the center value would be the same, but it would be more precise. And that would be just because of sample size effect. More customers would get the deal as time goes on, and you would have more evidence. So, conclusion, in this case, we learned how to conduct A/B tests online. You learned how to properly define a hypothesis, control variables, key performance indicators, and finally set up and analyze the results of the experiment. What we learned is that the promotion of 5% discount increased the percentage of customers by almost 1%, 0.8%, which, you know, over 1 million, it could be actually a very good increase. And we will have just to determine, okay, are the revenues that come from the extra overpowered the loss that we have in terms of 5% of the sale, so which could probably actually be advantageous. So keep in mind also that the promotion was time limited, and probably these customers might be more likely to return even after the deal is over. All right, so A/B tests are powerful to conduct a rapid experiment. Again, you do not need a super large proportion of your population. You just need a sizable group. However, in order to run it correctly, you need to take into account proper randomization, select control variables appropriately, and be careful about bias issues. Typically, with this type of experiments, you start small and then eventually you increase it before you make your final judgment in terms of the efficacy of your promotion or of your treatment. All right, Alex, should we take into account that previously 2% of users were already offered the promotion? Well, keep in mind though that repeated sales over this first of all, users are selected at random. Also, repeated sales are more unlikely because if you end up purchasing a flight and hotel package, chances are that you're not going to do it again the next day for the same location, right? So, and of course, we have to consider the cost and so on. Nicholas, 1% increase, where did that come from? Oh, that's just the result of what you have. That's the data. The data is telling you that the number of, the difference in percentage of customers from group A and group B was 1%. All right, so we're time to go up for a short break, and thank you for your attention. And we are going to follow up with another interesting case coming up. Muchísimas gracias.